Alhamdulillah, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam. Ya ibadallah wa nafsi itaqullah. Waladina jahadu fina lanahdiyanahum subulanna wa inna laha ma'al musinin. بني الإسلام على الخمسة شهادتي أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة والحج بيتي وصوم رمضان. قال ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. All praises to Allah, the Lord of all that exists. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the opportunity to make it to another Jumu'ah, and we worship none but Allah. And that praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is the only one who is praised. When we talk about the for the Arabic, for the praise that we use, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who everything that He does is not something that is an obligation for Him. Nothing that He does is an obligation for Him to do. He does it because he chooses to do it. It's not an obligation for Him to do anything. All the good that He does for us is by Him choosing to out of His mercy, out of His kindness, out of His will, His power, His knowledge, that He has done that for us. That nothing that He has done for us that is good is an obligation for Him. And He is the only one that gets that praise for doing everything just by His will, just by His mercy, just by His kindness, just by His power, just by His knowledge, just by His justice. But with human beings, there are some of us who, some things we can do that is an obligation upon us to do it, and we get praised for it. Some things that we do is not an obligation for us. We do it, to please Allah, to gain His reward, to gain His satisfaction, to gain His reward, to gain His good pleasure. And we get praised for that, as the most praiseworthy amongst the humans of who did that with, was the Prophet sallallahu and the prophets, that the good that they did, the care concern for their ummah, we know about the care and concern of the Prophet sallallahu for his ummah that he had, we think about some of the stories, like when he was at Taif and he went to give the dawah, and the people rejected him, and they sent, the street kids out on him, and they threw stones at him, chasing him away, So much so that it was reported that his sandal was clogged with blood, his own blood, But even after that treatment, he still refused to ask for him to be punished when he was given the chance, that Angel Jibril, alayhi salam, told him he can have the angel of the mountain to crush him and be away with him. But he had hope that it would be good that would come from him. That was his mercy for us. Was always on his mind, was always on his heart. That we're always a concern for him. And he's praised for that, beyond which was his duty, So he gets that. But when we talk about complete for all actions of doing something that is not an obligation upon one and getting praised for it, that is only reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who everything He does is only, if it's good for us, is because of His mercy, His generosity, His favor, He doesn't have to do anything for us. He doesn't have to do anything for us. So it's not an obligation for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us. He guides us because He is merciful to us. We have, and He knows best word to give His mercy and His favor, So we do not question His mercy or His favor. We seek to gain more. We seek to be grateful for what we have. And beginning with praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the Lord of all the worlds, and we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like His creation, as that is the summary of the Muslim belief, the Muslim creed, what we say, the Sunni Muslim, al-Sunni wal Jamaat, more formal title, but what most of us are familiar with, only Sunni, but al-Sunni wal Jamaat, and that represents the main body of Muslims all times until now, that the dominant group of Muslims have always had a certain way, a certain creed, a certain methodology. And they have always been a dominant group, and they have always been united in protecting that creed, protecting that methodology, protecting those beliefs and practices, protecting that system by the mercy of Allah, by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by his favor upon his nation, which has not been given to any other nation like that. Our tradition of preserving our deen and the chains of narration, which in every science are unbroken all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In every science, and there are many Islamic sciences, and in every science that system is intact by chains of narration, where those learn directly from knowledgeable teachers, all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in that, it has been called the beauty of our religion, the chain of narration. It's been called the beauty of Islam, And in that is much good, is much connection to those who walked the path, those who were favored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who had so much nur, so much light, and so much gifts to give people, just from being in their presence. And that connection all the way ultimately back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through that chain of narration. So it's beneficial for us to spend as much time as we can in the presence of those teachers, in the presence of those scholars who are the inheritors of the religion. As the prophets, alayhi salam, that they didn't leave any inheritors, but the scholars. The scholars inherited the prophets. The scholars inherited them. And what they inherited was the knowledge of the religion, and the right practice. We're talking about the right acting scholars, not the scholars who were only in outward form, who use their knowledge for a miserable gain. As we talk about in hadith, that one of the first ones to be punished would be somebody who had claimed to seek knowledge for the sake of Allah, but they would be exposed that day for seeking knowledge for fame, to show off. When we talk about the scholars who preserve the religion by Allah's mercy, we talk about the rightly acting scholars who stayed within the system, even when sometimes they reached a rank where they were knowledgeable enough to have like their own school, they stayed within the system. And worked to further the system. And of course, there were scholars who did, like we talk about the schools of jurisprudence, Islamic schools of jurisprudence. There were more schools than which have reached us now. As far as Sunni Islam, al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, 4 schools. There are only 4 schools: Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, and Hanbali. And what that was, those great men, they didn't add anything to the religion. It wasn't something new that they brought. What they did was codify, systematize what was before them, what was with the Sahaba, what was with the generation that came after the Tabi'in. They codified that, and systematized that and arranged it, and it was preserved not just to them. It was preserved not to just to them, because one of the reasons why it's only 4 schools that have survived is because they were the only ones whose knowledge and transmission was preserved through continuous chains of transmission, through continuous scholars updating, preserving, passing on, writing new books, going and doing details, defending those schools and passing those schools along. That's why those schools has reached us. There were other schools who had great men of knowledge. I think of like one, that's for us being African American. There was a school in Egypt in the time of Imam Malik. So this is, less than 200 years after the Hijrah, And of course, with the Hijrah, that's the date that we go for by our years, that we start our years, as we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam departed from this world in 11 AH after Hijrah. But so before 200 years after Hijrah, there was a great man in Africa. You talk about Egypt, but Egypt is Africa. Sometimes, we have to reinforce that because people like to mention Egypt, and it's so much, it's just, it's sinister in a way, because people think Egypt as if it's something outside of Africa, but we know Egypt is in Africa, So he had a school in Egypt, and he was considered by the greatest student of Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, because I mentioned Imam Shafi, these scholars of these schools were not, rivals like that. They learned from each other. Imam Shafi was the direct student of Imam Malik. And he said about this, Layth ibn Sa'd, may Allah be pleased with all these Imams, that he was even more knowledgeable than Imam Malik in jurisprudence. But his students didn't preserve his school. So it wasn't just about the knowledge of the teacher. It's the system, That's why it's a concept that systems last longer than people do. Systems last longer than people do. That's relevant for us because we live under a system of oppression. That's like on autopilot. It's a set in motion to continue to go. No matter the people that died, this system is still going. So much so that it said that it will take 227 years for the black family to catch up to where the white family is now. That's the system that's in place. Designed to keep us back. It's not an individual failure. That's at the level of systemic level. Which some things are avoided. When things are at that level, people try to, appease the people that they're doing good by working on some small individual issues, and they think, we could just get better training the individuals. No, you have to really revamp and do something to the system. To really bring about justice. So that it was that system. It was other scholars like that. Well, Layth ibn Sa'd, who was in Egypt, who was said was more knowledgeable than Imam Malik, but his school was not preserved. And there were other imams like that who their schools were not preserved. Some lasted a little longer than others, but their school didn't reach us. And one of the important things why I mention it today is because one of the schools revolves around one of the great descendants of the Prophet sallallahu, and his name was Ja'far as-Sadiq. And he had a school, but it is explained in our books and some of our texts, and we say our texts because all the imams are part of one system. It's not a sectarian thing. It's not a set tripping thing. They all, like one of my teachers said, when you get to the higher level of study, you see how they work together. So you see how all those scholars, from every generation, thousands and thousands of scholars, work together for the sake of the same thing. So it's not a sectarian thing. It's a brotherhood at its highest level. That's what it is. But this Imam Ja'far ibn Sadiq is explained to us that his school, and he was a great man from the Prophet Sallallahu family, knowledgeable, but his school has not reached us by the proper channels, by verifiable channels, by reliable transmission. That's it. That's what we have to understand. No matter what we think we understand, if it hasn't reached us through the proper channels, we can't verify it. We can only verify it through the proper channels, through the trains of transmission, and those are the scholars at the highest level who do that work of verifying something like that. It's a system. We understand systems on our jobs and hospitals. We're not going to go. I know y'all. A lot of people like me here. You're not going to allow me. I can perform surgery on you. You're not going to allow me to do that. Somebody that doesn't know me, they might think, hey, it's possible. It's a possibility he could know what he's doing if they don't know. But you're not going to allow nobody to perform surgery on you, on your family, unless they have certain certifications, you mean. Are they board certified? And that's what they came to. It was by unanimous agreement, by consensus, that these 4 imams were at that level, like board certified, and anybody else after them wasn't. You mean, and it's not an indication of anything wrong with those other imams, but just that their schools haven't reached us by the proper channels. And the big thing now is because you have people looking for connection, especially from a people that has been broken. You mean, we know from our people what slavery did to us, where families were separated even before the ship. Then after getting on the ship, those who survived further separated. And we were further separated. Even as time went on, somebody would just sell a wife away from the family, sell a husband away from the family, I remember reading one book where one slave owner, he said, I hate to be the one to do that, to separate a man from family, but I need the money, We weren't looked at, as nothing worse than animals, lower than animals anyway, So even within those levels of what appear to be somewhat compassion, he's like, I still need the money, So we went through all that and all that trauma, all that disconnection from our lineage, from our religion. As many of us were Muslims before we come over here. Many of us has roots to, a strong lineage of Islam, in Africa, where was great civilizations established, so much so that they were independent, where they had their own high authority and scholarship and knowledge and transmission, And then a lot of that history was kept away from us, and we will talk about that a little later. But through, not having certain things and having oppression, and just brokenness from the different things that happen to us, on all the different levels of us being here, coming to Islam, huge for us, as we know that our salvation just depends on that, our hereafter depends on that. But you still had people who still had a need for a certain connection, still yearning, and we know the best connection to any creation we can have is the connection to the Prophet sallallahu. So anybody can capitalize off of that weakness, So with that, we want to connect to the family of the Prophet sallallahu. So with us being disconnected from a system of Islam that we had in Africa, we didn't know what to take and what to reject, and we were easily manipulated, and very painful, because it's hard for a lot of the people to admit that. But you see some of the elders, I know some of the elders who I study with, 60, 70 years old, a lot of them women too, been in multiple movements, a lot of, being taken advantage of by certain movements, which we know, if we smart enough, we know that we were put together, that the enemy put us together, that it was somebody who divided us to conquer us, So we shouldn't just focus on blaming ourselves, recognize where we went wrong, but recognize that we were pit against each other. So much so, that some people lost their lives, and people will be ready to kill somebody over their sheikh and, and do this over their sheikh. And with that connection, whenever somebody would, especially amongst our biggest and most successful as far as organizing groups, that if you can get somebody to buy into the idea that this person, this sheikh is from the family of the Prophet sallallahu, then they'd be ready to devote their whole lives to be obedient to whatever he said, And that becomes problematic because it's not about personalities. It's not, like I said, when I was talking about those imams, of those schools, it's not just the school of the imam. When we talk about Islamic jurisprudence, we talk about our daily ibadah, because even in the salat, we're talking about that. We're talking about rulings that came from there, where you learn those rulings by those schools, just even to pray, the most basic thing, And that's important because I've been Muslim all my life. And I know I was only I was almost 30 years old when there were certain things in the salat that were, of a basic level where I would learn, wow, I don't know, I didn't know that, but this is a basic thing, So Within those systems, though, there are times when some of the students of those teachers had a different opinion than the imam. They used their principles for deriving a ruling, deriving a legal opinion, and they came up with a different conclusion. So their students were not just some, go along. They were high-ranking scholars in their own right, who had their own voice, who had their own ability to add to the school. And that's every generation after that. You had high-ranking scholars who had that ability on some level or another, to be able to contribute, be able to come up with a conclusion. Maybe it might be a new matter, where they needed to come up with a ruling on, to come up with a legal opinion on, or to further clarify, or the way between different matters and come to a conclusion. And anytime that one of those generations where you had scholars at the highest level in jurisprudence, when they agreed on a matter, that became a matter of consensus. And the proofs of that are in the Quran for anybody that want to look. They have those proofs available for following consensus, in the Quran, because I know a lot of people, they want to try to see proof, even though we don't really have the capacity to really see proof, because it takes a certain level to really understand what the proof is and how it's, you can't just do it just by, it's not just going to be always a text that you can see from the Quran or the Sunnah. So we'll briefly finish up on the next part. Alhamdulillah, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam. Ya ibadallah wa nafsi itaqullah. Wa innaka la'ala khuluqin azim. Huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And this is a very weighty topic that I almost didn't even want to do. I don't even really. So I don't want to force anything. I don't even like, really, I'm not really a speaker. I'm not really a public speaker, So it's not, something I will get excited for, to try to bring anything that might be uncomfortable or controversial or something that somebody doesn't wear. I'm not a speaker like that, It's whether it's the most basic thing, it's still a weight just to be up here, So it's not something, that's, comfortable or easy, something I just want to do to cause any fitna or anything like that, No, it's weighty, and it's something, that I still haven't got used to being up here. Even so much, that I, my first part of the khutbah, I went over than what I wanted to as far as breaking it up, because it's real heavy. But I felt, the need to address it, and maybe somebody can benefit. And I even thought, I don't even know who's going to even benefit from it, I was like, no, still do it. I tell myself, still do it. I was talking to myself, maybe I should write another khutbah, But it was too late, because it's how hard it is to even come up with material, And, and now in my mind, I got anxiety, so I'll be worried about how long it's going to last. Am I going to have enough material to cover, And then every time it's the same thing, I get to it and I'm like, oh, I didn't cover all the material that I wrote down, That happens. But hopefully, inshallah, I hope, it's my prayer, that it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, allows for some good to be facilitated, through me, not from me, as all good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anything that I good that I say, or anybody that says, is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, And all the bad, I've earned from my own hands, And Allah is the creator, and He has willed both out of His wisdom as well. Anything that is even bad, there is some good in it. Allah has a higher purpose for things than we even realize, But hopefully we can benefit from this. So when I was talking about the movement, the big movement, one of our big movements, it was, black. They controlled neighborhoods, ran drug dealers out of neighborhoods, had their own schools, even in my hometown community, small. I was too young, got an older brother in the room that was old enough to remember somewhat of living there, during that time, but Akron, Ohio, and they had their own schools, they had their own food program. They ran the drug dealers off the streets. Miles across the nation. They were on security. 24/7. People walkie-talkies, whatever. They made sure the sisters were safe to walk home. It was a standard. Like that. It was a lot of pride, and it was nationally organized, even internationally organized. When you talk about them having communities in some of the islands, so it was a height of the Black, Muslim power movement, and independence, but not to their fault. There's no expectation for like many first generations not to have their own access to authentic scholarship, and that's something that takes time. It takes generations to be able to really have the access, and then to really produce your own scholarship, which we haven't been able to do. And I'm not talking about relative. I'm talking about real. Talking about scholarship on a level where somebody has the ability to either transmit the rulings from one of these schools, or to be a scholar in Hadith, or any of those different sciences. To be able to have some weight. I'm talking about that type of scholarship. Relative scholarship, where somebody is called a scholar. But we're talking about scholarship on a level where we really need to produce. So you can't blame that first generation. They really were building. Fresh. Many young. 20-something years old, starting their communities, starting their families. Still figuring things out. But they were a threat. Enough to be interrogated, to be targeted by the FBI. Because they were organizing people. Feeding people, clothing people, organizing nationally. And you reached a point where somebody from the Prophet ﷺ was made the leader of what a big community that I'm talking about. And that was just enough for people to be devoted to trying to do all they can to be obedient, to be pleased with, to be pleasing to their sheikh, and you saw other things like that. Where somebody would be from the Prophet ﷺ's family, that people would be ready to give their loyalty to. But we're not talking about just individuals when you talk about the Prophet ﷺ's family. We're talking about a system that they adhere to themselves. That they adhere to themselves. Because just because somebody's, and I'm not talking about this particular individual, but when you talk about the Prophet ﷺ's family, they have to adhere to the same system that we adhere to. And that's why you saw the best of them. They were. When you talk about Ja'far Sadiq, even though his mother didn't reach us, he was a special service, a special need, and it was crucial to those imams, Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa. They were crucial into their service and helping them. So when you talk about them, they held themselves to a high standard. They held themselves to a high standard, and what we saw was a vulnerability for another group who praised themselves, who were not Sunni, who praised themselves for their love of the Prophet ﷺ, who tried to separate themselves, from the bunch, in their love of the Prophet ﷺ, in their claim, and they will be able to get individuals, individuals looking for connection. You can find certain people. You can, like out in nature. The lion doesn't always go after the lion. Mainly, unless it's together with another male. They're not going to go after the strong animal. Even the lion. Even the male lion, unless they're running together. In a pair, they're going to go after the weak, the old, and the elderly. Weak. Not to say it all old was weak, but you know what I'm saying. So they're going to go after something that's easier. So you had a lot of people susceptible to being indoctrinated with certain things, in the name of loving the Prophet ﷺ, in the name of loving his family. But one thing I want to mention before I close, that we, as what we call Sunni Islam, we have a tradition of contribution and love and value of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Like some of our teachers right now in in Yemen as our closer. Some of our teachers who studied in Yemen, they have an unbroken tradition of a pure lineage of the family of the Prophet sallallahu, who have always been on the methodology of Sunni Islam, al-Sunni wal Jama'at, under their Shafi and their Madhab, their Ashari and Creed, and their of Tasawwuf. They have always been on that tradition, going back to when they left there, to one of their ancestors left from Iraq because of a fitna that afflicted their family of the Prophet sallallahu, and he took 70 members of his family. You mean, so this is a great man of great piety, and he had members of his family with him who were like that. You mean, but even then they left protect their religion, protect their faith. You mean, and there's those signs in that. You mean that even the best of us, you mean, is not cowardly to do things to protect your faith. You mean, they think, oh, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to deal with this. You mean, he left, immigrated. You mean, his name was Ahmed bin Isa, named Tata al-Muhajir for his immigrating. He left, took a portion of the family of Prophet sallallahu, and he went to Yemen. He ended up in Yemen. And from then on, that family has always been there, and they have always been Sunni. They have always been Shafi. So they've always been on the methodology and the system that I was talking about. And they always have their own scholars, and their lineage is pure to this day, you mean. And they have had high-ranking scholars, like I had brought a book, you mean, to show people of Imam Huddad, who died in 1132 after Hijrah, or somebody like him who was not really, his status was not really known. And most of the big scholars and the big sheikhs, they're not really known by the people. They're not really known by the people. So it's not a thing, you know, where somebody's going to be, you know, looking and seeking for people to have them follow them. You know, they're not really known except by people that need to know, people that have a certain knowledge or certain recognition. You know, they weren't really known. You know, and he was one of them. That's why he said, I'm a door, but people won't realize that until I'm a grave. I mean, he wouldn't be known until he died. His value as well. So he was of that family, and he reached a level where he was able to, you know, do ijtihad, where he can, you know, have a opinion in the school, but he stayed within the school. So that's the tradition. And that's the tradition that some of my teachers, value and have instilled in us, that the family of the Prophet ﷺ is big and should be big for us. That we should need to feel that we need to go outside the tradition, to go outside any other group, to be able to feel connected to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, to be connected to the Prophet ﷺ, to have love for the Prophet ﷺ. Because within us, the tradition has been preserved, you know, and there are many, you know, who are very instrumental in preserving that tradition for us and bringing that knowledge and bringing that connection to us, you know. And then, like I said, so there have been several teachers. And you see them when they come back from Tarim, Yemen. Just the nur, the brightness, you can see they're lit up. You mean, it's something really beautiful that's going on there. Like I said, all started from one of the descendants who was the descendant of Ja'far as-Sadiq. You mean, he was the descendant of Ja'far as-Sadiq, who I mentioned, who was that imam who had that school. Who, you know, you will see people try to say, like, well, what happened to him? What about him? And they try to do it in a way to make you confused about what you have. You mean, what about him? Well, like I said, it's not just about the person, it's the system. You mean, the person can be great, but it has to be preserved by his students, and then so on. That's what we see. What was preserved through his lineage, one of the things that was preserved through his lineage was that system and our tradition. You mean, and one of his descendants, one of his near descendants, he left and took a portion of his family to escape the fitna. You mean, what was affecting the family of the Prophet ﷺ, that portion of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, in matters of foundational matters. And he left and went to Yemen. They have been there ever since. You mean, scholars, their own scholars, even at the time when the Saud and the Wahhabi family took over Mecca, they were there. They were there, high-ranking positions of scholarship. You mean, before the Saud family, you know, Abdul Wahhab wiped people out and took over. So it wasn't of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was Arabia, and it was of our tradition that we mentioned, you know, those 4 schools, 2 schools of creed, those who were practitioners of the Salaf. That's what it was. So I'm hopeful that, I went a little over, but I'm hopeful that we can benefit. My apologies for anybody that has any confusion. And, I'm always open to any questions. If I can't answer them, I can refer to those who can't answer them. But this is our tradition. Our tradition is loving the Prophet sallallahu is our tradition. Loving his family is our tradition, and it has been preserved. And they are instrumental, or have always been instrumental in preserving that tradition. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا واجعلنا مسلمين لك ومن ذريتنا أمة مسلمة لك ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا اغفر علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Assalamu alaikum.